so intensely for reasons that they can't even articulate. Whether it's the trans community or others, I think we all know it's kind of real. So there's a lot of friction going on. And pretty early on, once they're on this cruise ship, the two sides are already going at each other's throats. They're trying to talk about real issues, and then the two sides just start yelling at each other. But off screen, a murder takes place on this ship. And from there, the dominoes start to fall, and then all hell breaks loose, and it becomes a real mess, and it's a real fight for survival. And you sort of learn throughout the novel, what the core mystery is, but then there's the B mystery and there's the A mystery, and you kind of learn how the two of those kind of coincide. And by the time everything is done, Hardwick and Whistler, who have been through a lot of stuff already, will have never, ever been through anything like this before. And I think it's safe to say that it will irrevocably change them both and change their relationship going forward.
Okay, thank you, Russ. Thank you for the are you recording question, because I wasn't. I was futzing around with other things. Elise, I'll go back to you in a moment. You might want to restate some of what you talked about there for the sake of recording. But let's go to Mally now. My buddy. Hi, Mally.
Sure. Hi. I write about a time when the country was completely divided. Congress was absolutely ineffective. There was a pandemic and high inflation. In other words, I write historical fiction about the Revolutionary War. I'm not going to start with plot because Elise said something that triggered me. My heroine is also my alter ego. Rebecca Parcell is tall. I am short.
Me too.
Rebecca has a remarkable talent for mathematics and puzzle solving, which of course is part of how she solves mysteries. I have no talent for math and have trouble with restaurant bills at lunch. And she is quite good with guns and bows and arrows, also talents I do not have. I was an attorney, and my first book, The Turncoat's Widow, was nominated for an Agatha Award, which is just crazy. But I had found a document dated 1780, the middle of the Revolutionary War, and it was an indictment of a local farmer for the crime of going to New York City without the government's permission. And since I grew up in and around New York, this really offended me. And I took it to a historian who, in very polite terms, said, "Oh, honey, sit down and let me tell you about the real war." Historians think that in south of New England, perhaps as much as 50% of the population supported independence. And New Jersey, it was less than that. And there were so many people here spying for the British who controlled New York City that the government made it a crime to travel there, this New Jersey state government or colonies government. And this swirled around my head for quite a while before I created a heroine who discovers that her husband was one of those spies, and he's died in Manhattan, actually in a prison ship off the coast of Brooklyn. And she lives in Morristown. Washington spent 2 winters there, and Washington basically strong arms her into traveling to New York City to uncover her husband's secrets. And she's joined by the last person to see her husband alive, a former printer who joins her on this journey. And of course, there's a bit of romance, and they uncover a plot that threatens the new nation. The second book in the series is The Counterfeit Wife. So apparently they were successful, and Washington sends them off to Philadelphia to discover counterfeiters. And England actually was flooding the colonies with counterfeit money to tank our economy, which they sort of did. In fact, counterfeiting was so serious it was a crime punishable by death in that period of time. Becca discovers a long lost figure from her childhood who is suspected of being involved, and that sort of deepens the layers of the mystery. The third book in the series comes out in January. It takes place in Paris. Becca and Daniel think they are done with spying until a plot involving Benjamin Franklin, who was our ambassador there, draws them back in. So those are my books. And I forgot to say that The Counterfeit Wife was also nominated for an Agatha. Also kind of nutty. So that's me.
Okay. Elise, I'm going to go back to you for a quick summation of what we missed, what you did and we missed because I started recording late. And then
Oh, sure. I'll do it quickly this time. So I was a former television sports reporter for Fox Sports Network, and we were talking about our alter egos. So I'm small too, Melly, and when I was a reporter, I'm 5 feet, and the first sport I covered was basketball. So I would literally, my producer carried around a milk crate for me to stand on, and I'm still like that with Patrick Ewing, like barely reaching. So it was kind of funny. And oh, I just lost my earphone. So my book Lights Out is a combination of a TV sports reporter who was a former Olympic athlete, like I was saying, way cooler than me, living in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is a very posh town, and a murder that kind of combines the domestic element and gossipy stuff of Greenwich and the behind the scenes of the sports world, the glamour of it. You don't have to be a sports fan to like my book, but if you know sports, there'll be certain things you'll just get because, you'll see it. Even the title Lights Out is a sports term, but if you don't know that, it just sounds like a domestic thriller type of novel. And an NBA player is murdered and there's an investigation and, on from there.
Okay. Now I have a question for all three of you, and it'll take a moment to think about it. But I will preface it with this phrase that I know we all heard many, many times over the years in motion picture theaters. In a world where, how do you build your worlds? Because we have a sports world that is set in New York and Connecticut and is in reality. We have an historical world from a reality, from the past, but enhanced by imagination. And well, if this happened, maybe that would happen under these circumstances. And then we have a luxury cruise in space. And as of a couple luxury cruises on Earth, I'd kind of love to take a luxury cruise in space, but I think I might be a little scared, especially if things get really dicey. So, Malin, let's start with you. How do you build your worlds or your world?
In maybe it's the legal background, but all three of those stories began with documents original documents I found, or primary sources, or close to it. Letters from the time are great. I also rely a lot on maps. Does someone turn left or turn right? The third book coming out almost did me in because I'd been to Versailles, but I was using a map of the third floor of Versailles dated 1780 and had to stand about or sit about 3 inches from the computer screen to have a hope of seeing anything. I also have had pretty good luck talking to historians and curators about some of the things that make you feel like you're there. Like this great curator in Philadelphia who filled me in on what it actually would feel like to wear stays in the 18th century. Would you be able to breathe if you'd run more than 2 feet? That kind of thing.
What's the answer?
He insists it would have been comfortable, but I still don't believe him.
I suggest the book Rudovsky's The Unfashionable Human Body. It's a wonderful history of clothing. And yeah, stays in corsets were, I mean, I explained to my students at some point we were watching films, said, oh, what is that? It's the vapors. Hush.
Oh,
Because put your hands like this around your bodies. Now try to take a deep breath. And
Oh,
it needs
yeah.
more air. It can't. That's why she's passing out.
Oh, the other person I spoke to, I talked to the guy who's run the print shop in Williamsburg for about 30 years. And he was great. I think he's consulted with most of the TV shows set in that time period, but he told me that a print shop would have smelled like urine. And he explained that's how you clean some of the pounders that were used to press ink onto paper and everything. So I just love details like that.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, Russ, how do you create your worlds?
Well, specific to Hardwick, so this is the fourth novel that I've written, and I've written a half dozen short stories with her as well. So I've had a lot of years to sort of build out the world and the urban setting that she's in. It's based, it's probably loosely modeled after Manhattan, but loosely. But there's all sorts of, I have detailed maps that I've physically created myself, bridges, roads, tunnels, different neighborhoods, kind of a mix of kind of an urban streetscape with kind of a high-tech world. So you've got, everything you would find in a normal setting, plus you've got security drones flying all over the place, 3D holograms shooting out from billboards, cruise ships flying way overhead, transport ships launching off into various parts of the cosmos, and you can literally see the plume of the ships shooting out. So it's kind of a mix of what we see and what might be futuristic. And I've modeled some of the advanced tech on, for those of you who don't know, my day job, I work in the real estate market. So I know that very well. And I integrate actually a lot of real world detail on physical building construction and urban planning into my worlds, because I know that world very well. And then specific to this new book, I really did. I mean, I've taken cruises myself, but I spent a lot of time watching videos, live videos about going into the bowels of the ship, from the top of the ship where you've got all the, the pools and the jacuzzis and the volleyball courts, and all the way down to the guest rooms, and then down to the mechanical stations where, underneath in the belly of the beast, you've got these whirring motors and it's hot and steam pipes. So even within this closed setting, this kind of, there's not quite an upstairs, downstairs kind of a situation, but it's not dissimilar. So, you've got the luxury stuff up top, rooms in the center, guts in the bottom. And because of those things, I had to understand the physicality of the space. How do you physically get from, 100 feet's no big deal unless 100 feet's a really big deal. And I had to sort of really get down and understand schematics and diagrams. And, of course, at the end, you sort of have to make it fit based on what you want your story to be. But in terms of the world building, I want a mix of what feels very real and tangible and accessible, and maybe something that challenges us to kind of see things that maybe we wouldn't normally see today.
Okay. All right. Elise, I'm going to take a shot and say that you kind of live in this world, and you're so,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely write what I have seen. And before I was a sports reporter, I was a news reporter. I see your AP sign back there. I worked in the Albany Bureau for a year. But I was a news reporter at an NBC in New York. So I covered a lot of crime and tragedy and evil, I would say. I covered the Colin Ferguson Long Island Railroad shooting trial from the beginning of it to the end. And I really, after that, believe in evil. So I think the reason why I'm writing a sports book with crime is because it's my experiences. And I don't have that ability to just like imagine myself completely somewhere. I need like a touchstone. So I need to be able to close my eyes and see kind of a film in my brain of the house my character is in, or the room, or Madison Square Garden, or the athlete. And it can be a combination of people I know mixed with made up stuff, or it can be a place I've been, but when you turn the corner, that's made up. But I can't just like poof it out of the air like some of these other people can, which it's just not something I think I'm good at. But I can take you somewhere that I've been and show you things you wouldn't see from anyone else.
Okay. Visualization. Interesting. Because I'm listening to Russ talk about the bowels of the ship, where the mechanical stuff is. And I'm thinking you're visualizing something that doesn't exist yet, which is a different kind of thing. Many years ago, I went to see a talk on Star Trek. I think it was Shatner, and he was giving a talk about something. This was back before they made the first Star Trek film. And he brought along a highlight reel with clips from the TV show and talked about stuff. And as a gag at the end, there was a guy shoveling coal into an engine of some sort just before a shot of the Enterprise shooting off at warp speed. And it got a big laugh from the audience, but it's not something we would have visualized. But I do realize that writing requires, at least on the part of the writer, a fair amount of visualization. And one thing I always talk to my students about in creative writing classes was, you see it, but does your reader see it, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little about visualization. And Russ, let's start with you, because you're visualizing something that is not anchored in current reality, but you seem to be extrapolating from it when you talk about things with building structure and so forth. Well, do Russ, Mally, then Elise, and from that point, after you each give a response to visualization, let's open it to questions from participants. Okay, Russ, take it away.
So you're asking, the question is, do I use visualization? Is that the question?
I think you do. How does that work for you? How do you visualize? That's probably the best.
Well, I like to start, like Elise was saying, I like to start being grounded in reality, because I want that anchor point, just so I kind of know where I'm at. So if I'm going to start, for example, in an urban setting, you know what an urban setting looks like. It doesn't matter what city you use, whether it's New York, Chicago, Boston, Tokyo, whatever, you kind of know where you are. That's kind of where I start. But then, at least in this series anyway, the question is, how do I, in my mind's eye, how do I think that, let's just say technology was available to the point where you could kind of build whatever you wanted, what would we build? And a lot of that for me comes from need, right? That's how everything kind of happens, right? Things don't just appear because they appear. Somebody has a particular vision, a goal, they want to accomplish something. So what's the use? And the reality is that the spaces that we use are still, it's to do stuff, right? I have to live someplace. I have to eat someplace. I have to work someplace. There's still going to be education centers and medical facilities and places to shop and all that kind of stuff. So if we were in a little bit more of an advanced technological world, what would it actually look like? What kinds of stuff would you do in a futuristic setting that would be similar to today, but different? Maybe the sports look a little bit different. You play laser pool instead of regular pool. You can, instead of just going to an art museum, you could go through what I call an intergalactic viewing station, right? You could sit and you can look at this giant screen, but you can look into the far reaches of the cosmos and watch meteor showers go by, or galaxies swirling in the background, right? A galaxy is real. We know what that looks like. I just have to sort of project, how would I look at it? What would be my access point? And the vehicles themselves, how do they function? Would we still be using combustion engines and gasoline? Probably not. So there's going to be an evolution, and what kind of power sources are used to sort of physically manipulate our tech. And then in terms of, on the medical side, even today, we're using robotics, right? Nanobots. These are real things. But what if it was 200 years from now, or 400 years ago, or 1,000 years from now? Having a completely mechanical arm that functions just like ours might be real. Okay, so it's chrome instead of flesh. You might have a cranial implant, right, that fuses to your head, and it's just a computer chip, which is honestly the next step of this is just to plug it into your brain. I mean, that's right. I mean, that's what's next. So
discussion too.
Right. And so that's kind of how I do it. I start with today and just think, if, forget about the physicality of how we would do it, assuming it could be done, what would it be used for? And then what would it look like? And then I kind of go from there. And then, I do my research, and you find there's all sorts of great art out there that kind of really inspires me. And, I'm well-versed in, futuristic. I'm sure you can see in the background, right? I got the Mandalorian back there, and Back to the Future, and Blade Runner, and Terminator, and all that stuff. So a lot of this stuff has kind of been pre-thought for me. So you borrow from a little bit of here and a little bit of there, and put it in the blender, and you see what comes out.
Okay. And Mally, since your visualization kind of involves the going counterclockwise, how do you do it?
Yeah. Like Elise, I am not a poofer. I can't just make it up. And luckily, there are enough historical places that I can walk into the mansion where Washington spent the winter and see if you make a left or a right coming out of the kitchen. The hardest part for me writing a historical mystery is that I've got, and many writers who do this have, female amateur sleuths. So how do you create a woman, a character who's true to her time, yet attractive to a modern reader? Because most women in the 18th century, however proactive they might have been behind closed doors at home, wouldn't have been out in public, wouldn't have been permitted to talk to men who were not their husbands or fathers. And so finding that balance is hard, or, maybe it gets easier, but that's a hard one. And that required visualization. There are enough women historically who bucked that trend. So I, to the extent I could, I read about them. There were women spies during the American Revolution, so it was helpful to read up on that. But that was the area where I really needed to visualize what it might have felt like to be that kind of woman in that kind of time.
Okay. And I'm presuming that you have visited historical places?
Yes.
And
yes, my poor husband who comes who comes along with me.
Yeah, we could trade some stories on that sort of thing. But I have this strange thing when I visit historical places. For example, when I walk the battlefield at Gettysburg, or when I'm standing in Mitre Square in London, where Jack the Ripper butchered Catherine Eddowes on September 30th, 1888, I have a weird kind of feeling, and it's partly the knowledge, and this is the place, and I almost describe it as a vibe. Does that kind of hit you the same way?
Mm-hmm. One of the places it hit me, the local chapter of the DAR invited me to take a private tour of the house where Alexander Hamilton met his future wife. And we got to roam around in there and even climb up into the attic. And yeah, I kind of got that vibe there.
Good. Elise, where do you think, because you began a visualization thing, so where do you think visualization is going to take you as you continue writing?
Well, it's interesting when you talk about visualization, because what I was thinking, there are so many different ways it works. So my husband and I have this discussion all the time where if he closes his eyes, he can't bring out like a red square. He can't visualize in his brain. And for me, I literally see the plot as a movie. Like I can close my eyes and I have to feel it to write it. Like I can't just know what it looks like. I have to be able to feel what it's like to be in there, or in those things, and literally close my eyes and sometimes and just start writing it and seeing it there. So for me, that's what visualization is. And then I look for, not to describe it like just, vomit it all out, the description and everything, but find the one thing that brings you there. What's that little detail that no one else is seeing, or that smell or that sound that I can find by literally transporting myself into that. And because I had the experience of being in many of those places.
Okay.
I didn't really answer your question about what's next, but probably more of the same for now. I just turned in my second book in this series for the developmental edits. So
Okay.
thank you.
Can I ask, Elise, do you outline, or do you see that sort of film in your mind's eye and just start writing?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So this is my debut, if I hadn't said, and I kind of tried everything with it. It took me 10 years to get my agent, and then it's been a really long process, and now it's so exciting for me. This is my first interview since it's been out on AFR, so kind of exciting for me today. The second one, I had a year, and that was a really big thing. And all of a sudden I was on this panel and I thought, oh, I am a plotter, because I figured out the ending. I knew who the murderer was. And then I figured out and I didn't visualize this, like purely plot. These are the suspects. These are the red herrings. These are the clues. And then sort of broke that up as bullet points, not as an outline. And then I knew what my secondary stories were going to be. But then I just write. And then it sort of does come. So it's not like I just write without like some kind of arc of a map, but I don't outline. What about you?
I'm a plantser like you. Very similar. Actually, I think I've got an outline, and then somewhere around the end of the act one, I realize I need to tear it all up, and it's not what I thought it was going to be. What about you, Russ?
Probably a little bit the same. I spend about, I usually think about the plot long in advance, usually a few years in advance, just sort of like I let it just noodle in the back of my brain. And then when I know I'm going to start writing, whatever my day one of writing, I try to spend, 4 to 6 weeks before that, just doing the mental exercise of breaking down the plot, really pulling it apart, because I already kind of know what the theme is and a few of the punch points that have to happen. But especially, and I think you guys know, when you write a mystery, like the pieces have to add up in succession. You just can't, it's not that easy just to plug stuff in, because if the pieces don't logically fit together sequentially in whatever construct you have, then the integrity of your story just completely collapses. So I spend a lot of time trying to poking holes. And it's funny, what I do is I've told the story before. I'll walk around in my neighborhood. I wander around all hours of the night. I've been since I was a teenager, in the city, in the suburbs, wherever I am. And I put these in, and I put my earbuds in, so that when I'm talking the plot out loud, people don't think I'm a raging lunatic. Whether I am or not is a separate story. I just don't want them to think. And
That's a great image.
Right. And I sit there and I think about it, right? And I talk with my hands a lot, and I kind of think about, like, does that make sense? Would this actually happen? yes, no, maybe. And I kind of, well, if this happens, then that happens. Oh, that's good. Oh, no, 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 that doesn't work. And I kind of do a lot of that. And I have it in my head. And then I noodle it around. And if I can go through it in my head 5, 6, 8, 10 times, and I've held on to it, that means that I got it. And when that happens, then I start taking down notes. If I can't hold on to it, it means that it's amorphous. It's just not, there's not enough heft to it. And I sit down and then I start writing bits and pieces, a piece of dialogue here, a plot point here, themes here, and they kind of live in a document. And then I start to say, okay, we started here, got here, I got to here, I got to here. I know where I need to be at the end of part 1. I know where I need to be in the middle of part 2. I know how part 2 needs to end. I know where I want to be in the middle of part 2 and at the end. And then I start kind of putting in some pieces and I go, all right, I got it. And I start writing and inevitably I go, oh, well, I just forgot 6 pieces that have to go there. And like, wow, my perfectly constructed plot is not so perfectly constructed. And, and I do that. And I usually
that's interesting because it's partly chronological and partly not chronological, the way you
that's right.
work through it.
Because there are pieces I'm a very big believer in start with the end in mind. I always know where I want to end. Because it's just easier for me to get to that. It helps with the blueprint, right? And then I kind of back my way into it. So I need to understand the story front to back and back to front.
Mm-hmm.
If I can do that, chances are I have the right pieces. No such thing as a guarantee, as we know. You think you have a great idea until you realize it's a terrible idea. And your logic is unassailable until you realize it's absolutely flawed. And, so I prefer to have some structure. I actually wish I was a little bit better. I had better structure because then it would just be chapter 1 to all of the end. And I just have to write it. I already know what happens. I usually sort of like, well, first couple of chapters are this and this and this, and there are gaps because I like to leave room for where the magic can happen because you just never know what new plot thread will just show up or what new character will decide to introduce themselves, which happens. And all of a sudden things have to change. So I like that space, but I like to have guardrails because it kind of keeps me from kind of falling off the map. And it doesn't mean that can't work. Sometimes something comes up, in the writing process and you go, oh my God, that's what this book is about. And you're like, well, all right, I got to go back and fix it. But I'd rather have that, what's the old expression, man plans and God laughs, I'd rather have a plan and then change it than to have no plan, which doesn't mean, being a pantser can't work. Cause I know some writers who write great stuff from pantsing. I'm sort of in the middle. I wish I was a little bit more of a plotter because I think it would help me in the long run. For some reason, I seem to lack a little bit of that mental discipline that forces me to get really granular all the way through kind of at the very beginning. So that's kind of right or wrong, good or bad, better or worse. That's how I do it.
I have a feeling most of us follow that same thing because one thing all of you've talked about is some of the preparation for writing. And I was just thinking, Tammy and I spent, we got back about midnight last night, but we were essentially babysitting our youngest grandchild, and we were in Denver. And he's about 21, 22 months, and a little ball of energy. We did all kinds of things, but at the end of the night, we were exhausted. Okay, and I did no writing last week because I'm busy reading a lot of things right now, and I have a book that's coming out next year. At leisurely I can tweak it, but I'm planning to start a book in January. And every night as we went to sleep in a bed that I thought was kind of uncomfortable, I put myself back in that world that I want to create starting in January, and things started happening there. And it's like I haven't written. I have a few characters. I made some notes on that a couple months ago, but I go to sleep at night. Let's go back into this world, and the main character is named Grace. So let's go back into Grace's world, and then something happens, and I wake up and like, oh yeah, that'll work, and so it goes in, and that's some of that preparatory work that I think all of us do at one point or another. I don't think most people just try to write from moments of inspiration. I think we do have a plan, and sometimes something upsets that plan. something upsets the plan for the better. I mean, the closest example I can think of is I had a play that I was going to direct it, but the actor who was going to play the lead got sick and had to withdraw. And so I found another director and took the part. And the actress who was playing my daughter, at one point, she says something, and it's a mystery, essentially. She says the line is something like, "No, Papa." And it's set in 1925. And he wants her to be quiet, which is revealed. The reason for that is revealed later in the play. And in one of our first stand-up reads, as we were doing some blocking, the actress, who sort of became a mentee, she was a drama student at Buffalo State University. When she had that line, she just rushed me and grabbed me and said, "No, Papa." And it felt so right that I changed the script. And I think when we're honest with ourselves as writers, we think, wow, this thing might be better than what I thought originally. And then, of course, we also have characters that we want to do certain things. And then we find that the bastards are stubborn. They don't want to do what we want them to do. And we have to change things around. Let's open it up. Questions, comments from others here. Vicki.
Oh, Russ, well, first of all, when you started out, Gary, I thought you were going to be extolling the virtues of your subconscious because you put all this pre-thinking in, and then you don't really have to work it out. But when you get ready to put fingers on keyboard, it's all sort of there somehow. I don't know. That's how it works for me. But what Russ was saying reminded me so much of Charles Dickens, who was famous. Not only did he have these complicated plots with all these moving parts, but he was famous for going out in the middle of the night and walking around all of London. This is how he saw all of London in all of its good parts and its bad parts. And just, that I'm sure that he was thinking that whole time, but he was also experiencing, and maybe that's part of what you're doing.
That's absolutely right. I mean, it's just kind of my nature. I'm kind of a philosophical guy. I mean, you can see over other shoulder, this shoulder on the bookshelf, all those books, it's all philosophy, it's all philosophy and psychology and mythology, and that's always kind of in my head. And I'm a very big believer and part of it is who I am, and part of it's being in the real estate business for so long. I need to physically walk the neighborhoods. I need to touch I need to smell the air. Every neighborhood has its own kind of texture to it. I need to smell it, feel it, touch it. I want to physically feel the gradation of the roads. Do they arch? Do they lean? Do they go up? Do they go down? Are they flat? Do you see trees amongst the concrete and steel and glass and the different textures? And I kind of just soak it all in. And when I mean, we've all been there, no matter where you live, you know how it is. You walk down one street and you're in one neighborhood, you turn the corner across the street and you feel like you're in a completely different world. And you're like, wait a second. This was just a beautiful, I lived in Brooklyn for a while. And, I lived in Park Slope in Brooklyn in the 90s. And I lived on the corner of 6th Avenue. If you went 6, 7, 8, it got nicer as you went to Prospect Park. You went the other way, you went east towards 5th. I mean, literally from where I lived on the corner, halfway down the block, you just saw the houses start to physically decline, just like one step after another. It was like I went from black and white, from color to black and white, and from the 90s into the 50s. And then the next avenue over on 4th Avenue, it was like a death zone. You wouldn't want to be there in broad daylight. And the only way to know that is to physically experience it, for me anyway. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't look things up and look online and watch videos. That's all good too, but I like the physicality of it. It's just the way I'm wired. I need to physically move around and get my blood pumping, and I need to be a part of the ecosystem. It just kind of bleeds into me.
Al, you had a hand up?
In terms of visualization, when I was writing the third of my Katie Green books a few years back, it set most of it on the SS Lurleen, the flagship of the Matson line, going from San Francisco to Honolulu a week before Pearl Harbor. And I chose that ship because I had found a deck plan in a brochure for the maiden voyage of the ship some years earlier. And it had the complete layout of everything in the ship, obviously except the machinery, but I knew where everything was. And I tacked it up on the wall of my office. I was living in San Francisco at the time. I tacked it up on the wall, and I could always look and see how long it would take somebody to go from one part of the ship to another, or whether it would be impossible for them to see around a particular corner. It was absolutely the most important thing. I've been on ships myself, but not 1930s steamships. This was absolutely essential for me to visualize where my heroine and all the people in her orbit were likely to be at any given time.
I have a suspicion that visualization is becoming easier because of our technology. Some years ago, I had a computer game, Titanic Adventure Across Time. This was back in the late 90s. And I played that game, but one of the features was being able to walk through the ship. And they were meticulous in their recreations. And I tell you this because I learned then that I could use computers to visualize places I needed to be. Unfortunately, my mother died on Christmas Eve that year, 1997, while I was playing that game. And then the movie Titanic came out a month or so later. And my teaching assistant at the time, because I was really depressed, said, "Let me take you to a movie." And she took me to Titanic, and I just got lost in it. And she said, what is this? I said, yeah. I said, if the game I'm playing is right, as soon as they get up there and turn right, there'll be an elevator. And there was. And I realized that, wow, hey, technology makes this possible. So recently, when I was writing my play, Stoker's Guest, which is about Stoker writing Dracula, or getting the idea for Dracula, pre-visualizing, as it were, when he's in Whitby, I walked through Whitby on Google Earth with my Oculus Quest so I could see what the town was like. And I realized, hey, we can do research of all kinds now with our technology that just brings it to life. And it didn't occur to me that I was doing anything special until Tammy read the script and said, boy, how did you get so much stuff about the red roofs and Whitby and so forth? I said, I walked in the town. Never been there, but yeah. And because I think the visualization part is getting easier and easier, and that's wonderful. I don't think we want to over depend on it. I don't think we want to substitute it for creativity, but certainly it will give us what Russ was saying earlier, an anchor, because there's something, you go to a historical place, or you have experience in something like Madison Square Garden and a professional athletic event, and then you get anchored, and that anchor lets you extrapolate or imagine based on that. And we have so many more anchor possibilities for that.
Has anyone ever heard the term aphantasia?
No.
I just heard it recently. It refers to the inability to form mental pictures. I'm one of those, and Elise, it sounds like your husband is one. I can't do it.
He can't do it.
What's that?
He can't do it. I didn't know there was a name for it.
Yeah, I only found out recently. And all my life, I thought people were speaking metaphorically when they talked about making mental pictures, but no, most people can. But Gary, you're absolutely right. When I write, write a lot of stories set in Hawaii, and I go to YouTube, and an awful lot of people, video every step they take on vacation, and I thank them for it.
Can I ask Elise a question, especially because this is your debut novel? What's been the most surprising part of this journey for you so far?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I apologize for the three dogs barking in the hallway. I should have put them upstairs. The most surprising, I'm surprised it happened. I mean, I don't know if that's
That's fair.
Okay, like really, I had been 8 years trying to get an agent and all of that. And it was literally last summer, and I was compiling a list actually from the national website from Mystery Writers of America of publishers that take unagented submissions. And my friend, who a bunch of you may know, Tessa Weggert, were involved in Sisters in Crime in Connecticut. She's like, just give it the summer, go to Thriller Fest, do the Pitch Fest, just try. I really think you should be able to get an agent, after 183 rejections. And I did. And, long story short, I got an agent, and then a month later, I got the publishing deal, Thomas and Mercer. But I think it's that imposter syndrome, right? But the most surprising was that it happened, because it almost happened a couple of times and it didn't happen many times. And then after that, I'm so happily surprised at how nice the community is and supportive, because the news world and the media world was not. It was really cutthroat, and I really wasn't built for that. And look, you get it, right? Like 30 minutes of a newscast, you're all fighting for a minute and a half of it. It's competitive. And even if people weren't outwardly going at you, you were never being boosted up by other people. And I'm so amazed at the generosity of other authors and the community in, helping with advice or questions or, anything, like just supporting, and that everyone kind of helps each other.
I think
That's
that,
a great answer.
yeah,
Nobody reads just one book. There's room
Exactly.
for everyone.
Yeah. And it's so nice to be able to be in a world where, like, I used to love reporting, but I hated the politics of it. It was really kind of gross. And it's so nice to be in a community where where I love what I'm doing, but I also love the people around me and talking to them and interacting. Like, you're not sacrificing one for the other, like I feel like I did in the past.
right. Well, I think your experience in media is similar to lots of experiences that writers who become writers later have had. I just, you made me think of a time, because I'm a retired university professor, and I know I've had two occasions where work I'd written was stolen by someone else at the university. And in both cases got caught. And like one person was saying, but I'm the director of this program, so my name should appear first on the book. And I said, no, we both know what principal authorship means. You contributed stats and whatever. The text came from me. And I'm thinking, why is this such a hard sell that if I wrote 95% of the text, that my name should appear first? So you have a sort of cutthroat environments. I mean, I'm happy to have gotten through to retirement, because at this point, Gary doesn't give a damn. So it's like, whatever is there, I'm doing what I want to do, what I've always wanted to do. I'm just writing, and I don't have to answer to anybody. And answering to people, I think, is the thing that will push you into being a writer. It's just like, no, then I have to answer to myself, and so forth. I have a buddy who's a doctor, and we're both in our early 70s, and he retired and said, every now and then I think about going back to work, but then somebody's going to tell me to do something. Those days are over. I don't want to do that anymore. So welcome to part of that world, at least.
I know, it's so nice. It's so nice.
I started in around 2003, and I had the same experience you did, Elise. I was stunned at how welcoming and helpful and kind everybody was in the mystery writers community. I knew nothing about mysteries. I knew nothing about any of this stuff, and I now have a bunch of really close friends who are in our community, and they've been fantastic. And I really, it's not something that I expected. Like I said, I didn't know, but it's been the best group of people I've ever dealt with by far. And, I'm still publishing. I got another book coming out, and but even if I didn't, all the friendships and the relationships I've developed have been like really life affirming experiences, including some of the people here like Gary and Al, who are really lovely humans. Oh no, you really are. You guys are so
Thank you.
generous, and Russ, who's a nut, but I love him. He's wonderful because he's so enthusiastic. And Mally, who's a good partner of mine, and I'm not going to plug it now, but
You were going to be in
anyway.
trouble if you left me out.
I would be. Because I really think that you all who are now part of this, and if you're coming into it now, and I'm not a sentimental person, I'm a stodgy old German type, and not my way, but I'll tell you, I'm moved by how much I care about all these folks and how good they've been to me throughout, and many, many others that I can't even begin to mention. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And I agree. I found the mystery community very supportive. And it's been one of those things where we can say to ourselves, I'm not crazy. This actually means something. This actually says that some of the stuff I've been thinking, at least you talked about imposter syndrome. That's, I think all of us have had some experience with it. This shouldn't be happening to me for whatever reason. And
That's right, Gary. You keep telling yourself, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy.
exactly.
Eventually someone besides you might believe it. Just kidding.
Okay, it is now, we're 7:02, so we should start. Go ahead.
Can I
Chris?
just do a quick plug?
Sure.
CrimeCon, which Mally and myself and a bunch of other people is scheduled now for June 8th. And it's a big event, and the MWA New York participates eagerly. Al's been there. He's been very supportive. Thank you, Al. So I just wanted you guys to know we got a schedule. Our theme is historical heroes and hard-boiled.
Real
Right.
crime and hard boiled.
Anyway, we're focusing on historical novels and true crime and anything else we can throw in there. It's a really great conference. The guys that I'm talking about will agree with that. I really hope that everybody at MWA New York participates. We'd love to have you. Gary's been there.
It's great.
You liked it, right, Gary?
Had a ball.
It's
Yes.
great.
So did Russ.
Yeah, it's been a
So
couple
did
of
Russ.
times. Yeah.
It's
Russ,
in my
we're gonna
city.
involve-
It's in Stamford. It's where I
in
live.
Stanford. It's
Yeah.
40 minutes from Grand Central. Russ is going to play a big part. We're going to put him in. He's going to do a podcast from the event, which is really cool.
Yep.
And it's growing and growing. And I really hope that you all listening to me now, at the very least, come and join us in Stamford. Like I said, easy trip from New York. Thank you, Gary.
Hey, what's the date again?
I think it's
Eighth?
June 8th.
June 8th. It
Thank you.
is.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, June 8th. And it's a one-day conference. It's a piece of cake. Come on up. It's a nice time. You get free lunch, which is really worth the cost. Doesn't cost very much.
And
And a nice
all-day
lunch.
coffee.
And all-day coffee. And, Mally has been fantastic in making this all work for us and being our MWA representative. So thank you, Mally. And it's going to be we're really excited about this year. It's going to be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Good. Okay, thank you everyone for coming or joining in, and this was fun. This was enjoyable. And we do learn that we're not crazy, that we think differently from a lot of people.
Keep saying it. Keep saying it.
I know. Don't be too hasty, Gary.
The funny thing
Being
is,
crazy.
we think differently, but we're kind people who spend a lot of time imagining how to kill. That's,
You notice how he really emphasized imagining. Sure. Okay. I get it. This is recorded,
So I hope to see you all next month, and it will be a crime craft session, and the subject is sleuths. I haven't thought much beyond the title, but I'll come up with some questions, some ideas to start. So thank you all for being here, and see you next month.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you
you
all.
so much.
I
Most
know.
welcome.
This was amazing.
Thank you.
I know.
Take care, everyone.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.